So that's a macro growth model. Usually when people say we're going to talk about cities, they start by talking about cities. Since cities power the national economy, I think it's essential to start talking about the national economy and the global economy before we bring it down to metros. This is what I think of as the United States. These are the top 100 metros. After decades of growth, they're now 2/3 of our population, and they're 3/4 of our GDP. And this is really the new economic geography of just not our country, but the world. Cities, older suburbs, mature suburbs, developing suburbs, and the rural areas from which people commute back into the metropolitan areas. So we're a metro nation. We just don't particularly act like one. 47 of the 50 states have a majority of their GDP generated by their metropolitan areas, including a whole bunch of states in the heartland, whether it's Nebraska, Kansas, or Iowa, or Arkansas. Large portions of these heartland states still think of themselves as quote-unquote rural economies. You know, every time we have the Iowa caucuses, the candidates go to, you know, farm fairs or corn fairs. But I say you might want to go to the insurance cluster around Des Moines because that's what's really driving a lot of the Iowa economy. You know, Texas is a metro state. Your top metros, these are the ones in the top 100, about 71% of your population, 74% of your GDP. When you look at the entire state, about 89% of the economic output is generated by all your metropolitan areas. You know, there's an enormous amount of synergy between metro areas and non-metropolitan areas, between urban and rural. These are supply chains, there's food to market, whole range of, you know, linkages that are synergistic and symbiotic. But the fact is, for a 21st century economy, it is being driven by metropolitan areas. And any country that doesn't recognize that and doesn't act in the service of the metropolitan economies, again, is going to find some issues over time. On exports, top 100 metros, 66% of the population, about 3/4 of the service exports, because those tend to be the high-skilled. Manufacturing, a little less than the population share, because a lot of manufacturing in the U.S. is in the next tier of metropolitan areas, like a Fort Wayne or Peoria, but still holding their own. When you think about what we sell to Brazil, India, and China, a good portion of that, disproportionate portion of that, is really coming out of these top 100 metropolitan areas. You know, I was telling Angela last night, I was in Sao Paulo about 2 weeks ago. Sao Paulo is like obsessed with Houston. I mean, I have to say, I mean, you know, I go around and, you know, I say, so what do you think about the United States? And they'll say, well, we go to Miami to buy real estate, we go to New York to shop, and then we go to Houston to do business. You know, okay, that sounds about right. Very interesting. Top 100 metros. You know, these are our logistics hubs, not surprisingly. You're a hub. It's air, it's sea, it's rail. Most of this infrastructure is not being modernized to the extent that it needs to be modernized, particularly with the widening of the Panama Canal. But this is where the hubs exist in the U.S. When you look at who performs well on exports, top 4 are obviously going to be L.A., New York, Chicago, and Houston. And here are the next 6. These 10 metros produce about 28% of the goods and services that are sold abroad. So this is not freight flow, right? This is not throughput. This is what gets produced in this country, highly concentrated in these 10 metropolitan areas. When you think about other metros that are seeing manufacturing as a good portion, more than almost 90% of what they've been exporting in the last 3 to 4 years, it's these metros, a very different list. Small and medium-sized metros, particularly in the auto zone, which are seeing a recovery, and then other portions of the Midwest that, frankly, are producing the goods that are being used around the shale gas explosion. Another group of metros are being fueled by education exports, Boston at the lead. About 5% of Boston's exports is coming from education, just foreign students going to Harvard, going to MIT, going to BU, going to Northeastern, all the rest of it. So what's really interesting about this is to try to drill down and understand the difference between metros. This is the prior economy.